Welcome to Second Take, the show that focuses on the issues behind the news. If the South African government hopes to re-establish a full nuclear power industry to produce 21 gigawatts of electricity by 2035, an investment of almost 1 trillion rand is needed over the next quarter century. And this means finding the fuel to power the plants. Mining Weekly senior contributing editor Keith Campbell is in the studio to tell us more. Welcome to the show, Keith. Can you tell us a bit more about South Africa's nuclear investments?
Right, well, I think it's very important to point out that the South African nuclear power program had two elements to it. So the recent apparent axing of South Africa's own indigenous pebble bed modular reactor program does not end the South African nuclear power program as such. There was a second element, separate, independent, parallel, which involved the construction of new pressure water reactors. Pressure water reactors are much bigger than PBMRs, and this program appears still to be underway, but a go decision, though it has been made in principle some years ago, has still not been made in practice. And until that decision is made, we will not know the scale of the investments required. The figure of 1 trillion rand over the next 25 years that we have published is an estimate. It's not an official determination yet. Now, this estimate includes not only the construction of the new pressure water reactor nuclear power plants, but also the possible reintroduction of a full nuclear fuel cycle. Now, it's very important to make clear that South Africa actually once did have the capacity to undertake the entire nuclear fuel cycle and did so. This was closed down in the 1990s because it was hopelessly uneconomic, extremely expensive, and South Africa's domestic demand for nuclear fuel did not remotely come close to break-even point. So the system was closed down and the country now imports nuclear fuel. Now, of course, from a South African point of view, re-establishing a complete nuclear fuel cycle means maximizing beneficiation from the country's uranium resources. The way it works is that you mine uranium, you process it, you produce a concentrate known as uranium oxide U3O8, popularly called yellow cake, though apparently it actually is coloured khaki at the end of the process. Now, this is what South Africa still does, and the yellow cake is then exported for processing into nuclear fuel. And what happens basically is that the yellow cake is converted into gas to allow the uranium to be enriched. The uranium has to be enriched to act as a fuel for the pressure water reactors. The thing about uranium is that the element we want to use as the fuel is U235, which occurs at a rate of about 0.7% of uranium ore. Most uranium ore is uranium-238. And what we want to do with enrichment is increase the proportion of uranium-235 from, as I say, about 0.7% to about 3.5%, 5%, no more than 10% for use in nuclear reactors. This is done while the uranium is in gaseous form as uranium hexafluoride. That is then sublimated into a powder, uranium dioxide, that is then pressed into pellets, which are sintered and ground and subject to various processes like this. And these pellets then form the element that goes into nuclear fuel. Again, it's important to point out that nuclear fuel is not like a radioactive equivalent to lumps of coal or tankers full of oil. What happens is that these uranium pellets are placed in fuel rods, they're called. These fuel rods are then placed in skeleton structures which are called fuel assemblies. And it's the fuel assembly that South Africa then buys and is brought back to South Africa and installed in Coburg. For South Africa to dominate the nuclear fuel cycle, it requires that South Africa not only be able to undertake the enrichment process, but the fuel assembly manufacturing process. Fuel assemblies are not mass-produced components. They are carefully engineered artifacts designed to fit into specific reactor designs. And they require the use of zirconium alloys for the fuel rods and for the fuel assemblies, because zirconium is very corrosion resistant and is transparent to neutrons, and the travel of neutrons to the reactor core is essential to the nuclear fusion process. South Africa also has significant zirconium reserves, so it also provides a basis for the enrichment of zirconium, for the beneficiation of zirconium, not enrichment, sorry. Now, the problem is that to break even financially, which is what the Department of Energy would like, South Africa would have to produce about 360 tons a year of nuclear fuel. That, under the current plans, such as we know them, would not be achieved until about the year 2035. So, complete nuclear fuel cycle on a commercial basis is not possible before 2035. And on a non-commercial basis, in which the South African government accepts that the fuel production plant is running at a loss for many years, it can be done sooner. However, it is possible to increase the level of beneficiation of uranium without going to the whole nuclear fuel cycle. So South Africa could achieve enrichment and then pass the enriched uranium on to another country for conversion into nuclear fuel. Currently, when it comes to buying nuclear fuel assemblies, South Africa generally has bought them from France or Russia. There is no necessary connection at all between South Africa's uranium production and the enriched uranium South Africa receives back in fuel assemblies. So South Africa may very well sell yellow cake to the French, but the fuel assemblies that come back to South Africa might contain uranium from Niger, or from Australia, or from Canada. And the fuel assemblies bought from Russia will almost certainly have uranium from Russia and Kazakhstan, not from South Africa. Moving up the uranium beneficiation process in South Africa would make better use of South African uranium. But it is a complex process.
So what then is the export potential for South Africa in uranium?
Well, the export potential for South African uranium is growing with the global expansion of nuclear power. But at the same time, other countries are expanding their uranium exploration and mining activities as well. But I think there is a decent future for the export of yellow cake. Further down the line, the question of exporting fuel assemblies is more uncertain simply because we're looking so far into the future, a quarter of a century. Other countries are also going to develop uranium fuel cycle capability. So the competition is going to grow. The market is also going to grow. And there's also, of course, the fact that if South Africa builds enough PWRs, it will be possible to have a commercially based nuclear fuel cycle in South Africa without exports at all. But obviously, the country would like to export these. But the potential is there, but how big it will be, that's an awful long way to look into the future.
Thank you very much for your time, Keith. That's the show for today. Join us again next time for more news and insights into what's happening in the mining world.